Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Elevate Your Coaching Impact, Connecting Assessment Insights to Behavior Change. I'm Peter Santini. I am the Vice President of HR Management Consulting Practice at HR Strategies Consulting. I oversee the HCM practice for the organization, and I'll be your web host for today. Our topic today, we hope to show you how psychometrics and coaching support targeted personal and team development, share examples of how we have used this approach with clients, and provide you some practical resources and takeaways. Like any team, the output is based on your team members, and we have two fantastic team members joining us today as our webcast presenters. Our first presenter will be Kristen Brown. Kristen has worked with leaders at all levels from C-suite to high potentials to design and implement action plans to help them achieve their personal and team goals. Kristen has over 20 years of business experience, including expertise in leadership development, change management, organizational development, team effectiveness, and human resources. Kristen has worked with an array of clients in finance, insurance, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, retail, consumer packaged goods, healthcare, not-for-profit, automotive, and government sectors. Say hello to everyone, Kristen.
Hello, everyone.
And joining us is also Jerome Zinan. Jerome is a master certified coach who partners with executives and high potential leaders at various levels who are emerging within their discipline. Jerome has over 25 years experience working in human resource leadership roles in corporate environments supporting Fortune 500 companies in Canada, the Middle East, and the United States. He stays current on the most effective methods, techniques, and success factors for leadership development while enabling behavior change and driving results through individual team coaching. Say hello, Jerome.
Hello, everyone, and welcome.
So that's kind of our introduction, and we hope that our discussion today will focus on these salient points. So discuss the learning and coaching process, examine a team effectiveness model, explore how psychometrics, specifically the Birkman method, can support both personal growth and team effectiveness, give you some resource and takeaways, and anything else those on the call are hoping to take away from us today through the session. So we encourage you through the Q&A or the chat box on the tool to ask questions or make comments, and we will respond accordingly. So that's it for the introduction. So why don't we kick it off, and I'm going to turn it over to Kristen.
Great, thanks very much. And please let us know if you're having any difficulty hearing us or anything of that nature as we go along. So thanks, Peter, for the introduction. And, I thought what I would do is begin with really kind of orienting us to the learning and development process. So I suspect many of you are working in the human resource area or people development area, and really just to kind of orient us to, what we're talking about when we talk about personal development. So really it begins with this notion of defining your ideal self. So this is sort of your aspirational goals, your personal goals, your professional goals, really what it is you're striving for. And that comes from some personal reflection. It comes from kind of thinking about what you want to achieve. And then we kind of contrast that to, our real self, and we know this through perhaps feedback, self-reflection, self-assessment, and, obviously if you're doing a psychometric, that can provide some really valuable feedback around, how you are today. So once you have those two pieces of information or those two lenses, the ideal self and the real self, the next step is to really start to prioritize what it is you want to focus on. What are those areas that you want to build on, some strengths that you have, you want to leverage those? Are there gaps that you need to be mindful of that you want to kind of try to close? Once you start to focus on what are the goals within your kind of coaching action plan or development plan, we really start to put the pen to the paper and kind of craft what does that plan actually look like. And we like to take a approach that's based on a 70-20-10 formula. And I'll talk about that in the next slide a little bit more, but really oriented towards, how adults learn and really taking a very experiential component or focus on the development plan. And then in the center there, kind of, helping and supporting this whole process are your leaders, your peers, mentors that you may have, coaches that will help support this whole development process. And then, of course, it's great. We've got our individual plan. This is wonderful, but really this is where the rubber hits the road in implementing the plan and really trying new habits, new behaviors and skills, moving outside your comfort zone. And I've just included a link to Richard Wasatis and some of his intentional change theory, which, this process is somewhat derived from. So for some, from a learning perspective, if you want to go a little deeper, there's some information there. If I could have the next slide, Peter.
Will do.
So this is what I was alluding to before, the 70-20-10 model. Adults, we're busy. We have a lot of competing priorities. And, most adults learn through experience. That's where we get our greatest learning, through challenging assignments, stretch assignments, new things that we might take on, like leading a strategic initiative, expansion in our current role. That might be presenting at a high profile meeting and developing some of our executive presence. So really most of our learning as adults comes through doing new things, experiential learning. The other way that adults learn is through exposure. I like to call this, observing others, learning from others. So, this can happen through some career coaching discussions. It can happen through mentoring, through coaching, but also just observing, who does this well in your world. If you've identified an area, so for example, executive presence, and we always deconstruct what elements the person wants to focus in on. But we talk about who does this well in your world? Who do you respect that has that kind of presence that you aspire to? And, what aspects of their experience do you want to try and take away and incorporate into your own practice as a leader? So really having I call it like having that person on your shoulder and kind of having a clear vision of a behavior that you're trying to grow or a skill you're trying to grow through observing someone else. And then the 10% is education or formal learning. So this is, we attend a leadership program or some kind of a training program. Perhaps it's viewing TED Talks or reading a book or a book summary. So this is the formal learning aspect. And, I think we've all had the experience as adults where we've gone to a seminar and we got really excited about the knowledge that we acquired there, and then, went back to the office and maybe we applied, 5% of what we learned from the few days out of the office. So, this is kind of the gravy. And, where this shows up with coaching and the approach we like to take in coaching and creating those action plans is really to focus on what are the triggers for you to practice a new skill or behavior. So that's the experiential. Might be specific meetings, board meetings. It could be, meetings with your leader or your skip level leader. If you're focusing on presence, again, who are you identifying that does that well, learning from others? And then the 10% might be some, literature that we send you, or a framework or a communication model that, may help you to really craft that executive presence. And this is derived from a model that was developed by Morgan McCall, Michael Lombardo, and Robert Ickinger from the Center of Creative Leadership. And they've got some wonderful resources, sort of legacies from these folks in terms of, really how do you get people to grow and develop their skills? And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about the takeaways. So I think we can move to the next slide if there's no questions about that. And then this other aspect of personal growth is really what we talk about is the conscious competence ladder. So this is where we move from a lack of awareness to mastery in terms of developing new skills. So, at the beginning, at the bottom of the ladder, we're in unconscious incompetence. This is, might be a blind spot, just something we're not aware of, that we're not actually competent in a certain area. Again, this can be surfaced through a psychometric or a 360 or feedback you received, or perhaps you're in a new role and it's calling for a different skill set and you may not necessarily realize that you don't have that full competence. So what happens is that aha moment, it's the awareness. That's the first step in the learning cycle. So then, maybe you've developed an awareness. Oh, I really have to develop that executive presence. This is going to be really important in this role because I have to influence a lot of people, and I have to be credible, and I have to, have conviction in what I'm saying. So then you kind of move into that next step, which is conscious incompetence. So now I'm feeling a little vulnerable. I'm feeling like, wow, I thought I was pretty good at this, but actually I'm realizing that, I'm a bit insecure about some things, or maybe I'm not communicating as clearly as I should be. So now I've moved into this conscious incompetence. And where the kind of the ouch or the learning and change happens is as we move from conscious incompetence to conscious competence. This is where, we're actually practicing those new skills or behaviors, right? That's 70% of the model, the experiential learning. We're actually looking for opportunities to practice a new skill or behavior that isn't something that we're necessarily as familiar with. So it can feel uncomfortable, and pain is growth. That's what I like to tell my clients. Pain is growth. Sometimes we'll get some resistance here. It'll be like, well, I just want to be myself. I just want to be who I am. Why can't they just accept me the way I am? And my challenge back to clients is, well, you can't just say, I want to be myself. You want to be the best version of yourself. You want to be showing up as the most effective version of yourself. And really that's going to require a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset that I am who I am and they just have to accept it. It's really about constantly growing, adapting, different stages in your leadership journey. You're going to have different skill sets that you're going to have the opportunity to build and grow upon. And it will definitely feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to mean that you're not being authentic. It just means that if you authentically want to grow that capability, that you're going to have to put some effort in, and that's still authentic to you. So as we move into this practicing and this trying new habits and behaviors, we start to get into that behavioral shift, that mastery level, where now it's unconscious competence, right? We don't even, we've done it so much now, we're used to the public speaking or the presentations or speaking with senior leaders, that it doesn't make us as nervous or anxious anymore, that actually that part of it has gone away. And you've got a routine that helps you feel prepared. And it feels somewhat second nature. It's not as difficult for you to do it anymore. And so it just moves into this easy flow, a way of being that you achieve once you achieve mastery through that practice, through that awareness, through trying new things. And again, if you want to learn some more, we've included a link as well that will be in the resources and takeaway. If there's no questions, then I think we'll move to the next slide.
Actually, Kristen, I just have one comment.
Sure.
I'm assuming as someone goes through this process, they're going up and down. It's not necessarily linear. They can be in one spot and then take a step back and then take a step forward and take a step back as they learn towards mastery. Is that
Yeah,
kind of
I
accurate?
think there's different aspects. So like if you think about executive presence, right? There's a lot of different elements to executive presence. It's about, how do you create credibility? How do you communicate? How do you create connections and be influential with people? So they may become very comfortable perhaps presenting, but they may not be building the right connections with people. So there may be some nuance in what they're competent on, right? So there may be different tiers of that where they would say, now I'm ready to master this component of presence, right? So I'm going to be back into that conscious incompetence again. Like I thought I knew what it was, and now I'm actually finding there's a couple more layers to this. So I'm actually have to focus on a subset of that executive
Yeah, I think
presence.
I was exactly what I was thinking is that your awareness is broader than just one topic. It keeps evolving as you move through the stages. So you might have going into conscious competence, then conscious incompetence, and then going back up to conscious competence, and then unconscious competence, and something happens, and you revisit your feelings, and you kind of learn more, and it just keeps evolving. It's kind of not necessarily linear, but more circular.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know about that new skill you're developing, right? There is nuance to it.
Correct. Okay, I'll go on to the next slide.
Great point, Peter.
One other comment I would just add there,
Sure.
is that no one moves through these stages at the same pace. right? We're all at different stages, different pace. We can't set a timeline to when you go from your unconscious incompetence to a conscious competence, right? There's so many factors at play there. So just to be gentle with ourselves as we learn and change our behaviors.
Good point, Jerome.
It's a great point, and even like that's where the psychometrics can help too, right? Because you're going
Correct.
to have some preferences that may lend themselves to executive presence. Maybe you're, quite extroverted, and that actually could potentially assist you if you're trying to cultivate that presence. If you're more introverted, you may have to find different ways to build that credibility, right? You may have to shift a little bit. So I think it's an excellent point that we're, depending on the competency we're building, there's different levels of difficulty, I guess I would say. Okay, so just to kind of draw that link to the psychometrics and the personal development and coaching. So, the psychometrics, and again, in this case, we're going to be talking about the Birkman method, but really they aim to help you understand your real self in order to assess against your ideal self. It's another sort of, a bit more objective data point, something outside of yourself you can kind of look at and gain some insight from to say, where do I have strengths or over strengths that are showing up, and how do I move closer to that ideal self, and what possible things could I have to overcome to move closer towards that ideal self. So again, the psychometrics are one aspect of it. It may include some 360 feedback or feedback loops you create with others, and of course your own self-reflection. It's going to potentially awaken your self-awareness by identifying areas where you are unconsciously incompetent. It's going to tell you, well, maybe I kind of shy away from conflict, and that may actually, if we keep using this example of presence, people may say that you're not a strong leader. You don't have conviction because when there's a conflict, you shy away from it. So it's going to help awaken some of that self-awareness, and it can be a spark or a motivation for personal change. Once you get that insight, it's kind of hard to unsee. Once you kind of look at it, you say, that does resonate, or that is consistent with feedback I've received, or I do know that to be true about myself. It sparks that motivation for change to actually translate that into an action plan. So as coaches, we'll work with our clients to refine those insights into goals and create an action plan with targeted experiential challenges that will really activate the skill development and behavioral change. Because it's great to have insight, but if the insight doesn't actually have a plan of action or a course of action associated with it, then it's sort of, the dusty binder that goes on the shelf and you never look at it again. So really, our perspective on this is we don't just do an assessment. We do an assessment and we do coaching, and we support our coachees to actually create those new habits, try those new skills, championing them along the way, challenge them if they're backsliding. These are the kinds of things that we would offer as coaches. And we also like to build in alignment sessions with the coachee's leader. So if you recall in that learning process, in the middle were, coaches and mentors and leaders and peers. So it's really important. Our philosophy is it's really important to have the leader's engagement with our coachee to really make sure that they feel aligned with the goals that we select, that we help to facilitate a really good dialogue between the coachee and the leader around, what is that ideal self that we're moving towards, and what are the key areas you need to focus in on, and get some alignment around those areas, because obviously the organization is investing in the person as in a coaching engagement. So it's important that the leader feels that those are in fact the areas, and that they can have some good back and forth to really refine what those goals are and make sure that they're the right ones that are going to actually help support the person, whether it's with a specific development area or whether they want to, try to move into, more responsible roles. That leader insight just can't be replaced. And then also talking about, what are some of the planned actions, because the leader may have a line of sight to different opportunities. So taking that executive presence example, the leader may actually come to the table and say, you know what, I am, typically presenting at the senior leadership forum, and I'm actually going to ask that you be presenting at one of those forums in an upcoming forum. So they have insight into, where could some of those actions come into play that would help trigger that experiential growth. And then also, of course, the cadence of progress checks. Are they going to be reviewing this regularly in their one-on-ones? Are we going to set some formal touch points where we're going to specifically talk about the progress that's being made? So really outline what the progress checks are going to be with respect to the growth and the learning. And then we also like to build in a wrap-up session with the leader. So the nature of coaching is we have confidential conversations with our coachee, and we're not sharing that out. We have formal checkpoints with the leader and the individual so that we can facilitate good dialogue, facilitate good feedback. And then at the end, because obviously the goal is not to have a coach forever. We would love that, but it wouldn't really be in service to our clients. We want them to feel self-sufficient. We want them to feel comfortable that they're ready to kind of tackle this on their own. But what we like to do is create a wrap-up session that really provides the opportunity for the coachee to highlight, what have they done differently? Where have they really tried to improve or, leverage a strength? And what was the impact of what they've tried? And then what learning did they acquire? Because, there's going to be some experimentation. They're going to try some things. They're going to be brainstorming with the coach. We're going to kind of throw out some challenges to them to try some different approaches or ways of doing things. They're going to decide what they ultimately want to try out. But some things are going to work better than others, right? And there's learning to be gained from that. So they're going to talk about, when I tried this and I really was very forceful in my communication, this was the positive about it, but I also felt that I shut down some people. And so I have to maybe I went a little bit too far in that forcefulness of communication. So now I have to really readjust. So the learning was that it's a kind of a balance. So those are some kinds of conversations that the coachee can have and update their leader on in terms of what they've actually acquired. Because, as coaches, that's what we observe the leaders really want to know. What have you tried differently? What difference has it made? And what did you learn from it? And, also importantly at the wrap up is also to think about how do we keep sustaining this action plan and this learning? Or what's next? What's the other area of focus that the leader and the coachee can work together on? So we really like to think about the sustainment plan of this. Great, and I think we're ready to move on if there's no questions. And I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Jerome. Oh, no, sorry, I'm doing this part, aren't you, Jerome? Okay,
Jerome can do it if he wants.
Oh, sorry, my apologies. So the next aspect, we talked about team coaching. So we really, we use coaching, there's a different approach that we take when we're doing a team effectiveness or team coaching piece. And one of the models that we have brought in with our team coaching work is the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. And I'll just get you to move forward, Peter. Mm-hmm. So, Patrick Lencioni, for those of you who don't know, is, quite prolific author. He writes on organizational health, team engagement, the ideal team player, how to have really great meetings. So just all manner of organizational kind of content. So he talks about the 5 dysfunctions of a team. So of course we spend a lot of time working in teams, and teamwork really is one of those sustainable competitive advantages that we don't always largely tap into, and it can be hard. So Patrick Lencioni has proposed a model of teamwork, and really the foundational piece of this is trust. And I'm going to kind of quickly walk you through, give you kind of the Coles Notes version of the model, but really, he talks about absence of trust. These are the hurdles that often teams will face. And if they don't have trust, it's very difficult to continue to move up the pyramid. And I'll explain what each of those levels are. But members of great teams, they really trust one another on a fundamental emotional level. And they're comfortable being vulnerable. And they can share their weaknesses, their strengths, their fears, so that they can ask for support and help, or they can, leverage other people's strengths. And they get to a point where they can be completely open with each other without filters, right? So, this notion of vulnerability and awareness of our strengths, that we in our areas that we need to develop, also links nicely to the psychometric approach. Okay, we'll move to the next one, Peter. Done. So, you know, once we have a team that has trust, and obviously there's ways that we help to facilitate and you know, have some exercises around how do they build trust on their team. And actually using the psychometrics and the Birkman, we have worked with clients, and Jerome will get into a little more detail around how understanding each other better and our preferences and our style can actually help to support that building of trust. So, you know, Lencioni says that, you know, if you don't have trust, and there's a potential for having, like, it's a required piece of the puzzle is trust in order to lean into conflict, to really, teams that trust one another, they're not afraid to engage in that passionate debate around issues and decisions that are key to the organization's success. You know, they have that unfiltered, you know, truth telling, being hard on problems, not on people. They don't hesitate to disagree. They'll challenge, they'll question one another, and it's really all in the spirit of like coming up with the truth. What is the truth about the matter? You know, have we really had an opportunity to weigh in and share our perspective, and, you know, explore others' perspectives, and you know, not be worried about hurting one another's feelings or being kind of passive in that, avoiding the conflict. He talks about artificial harmony, you know, where everybody's kind of agreeing, and it's not necessarily the best, because you're actually not getting to tackle the real issues that your organization may be facing or your team may be facing. Okay, so we'll move to the next area. And so, you know, you have to have trust in order to engage in conflict and be tough on problems, and get the organizational results you want to achieve by understanding what's really at issue. And if you haven't had that chance to weigh in, if you haven't had that chance to, you know, have some good dialogue about it and share your perspective, it can be difficult for you to commit. So, you know, I think we've all had the experience of sitting in meetings and we're just like, oh, I'm not going to say anything. It's not worth it. You know, why would I do that? But then suddenly, you know, decisions are arrived at, and we have not engaged in giving our opinion or, you know, challenging. And it makes it much harder for us to actually commit, because we haven't had our chance. We haven't had our say. We haven't taken that opportunity. So it's not necessarily, I mean, teams that engage in that unfiltered conflict, they're able to achieve buy-in around important decisions, you know, even if people do disagree. And, you know, we don't all need to get our way. I mean, I think we're all adults. We realize that we're not always going to get our way. But if I feel that my point of view has been considered, that I've had a voice, that I could be understood, and ultimately, if a decision was made, we can disagree and commit. But if we skip the step of airing our opinions and you know, challenging and understanding, it's going to be a lot more difficult to commit, disagree and commit, or agree and commit. It'll be a much bigger challenge. Okay, we'll move on to the next. So the next one in this area, avoidance of accountability, is the most common area that organizations are challenged by. And that's because that, you know, teams that commit to decisions and standards of performance, if you want to be an effective team, you're not going to hesitate to hold one another accountable for adhering to those decisions and standards. So, you know, I've got trust, I've been able to air my opinion, I'm prepared to commit. This means that I might actually call out one of my peers or my colleagues to say, hey, you know what, we all agreed on this. Why haven't you fulfilled that commitment? Why haven't you done that? Versus always relying on the leader. So it's not something that we as peers or as leaders holding peers accountable are always as comfortable with. But yet it's one of those things that in our complex world, that soft peer pressure, that accountability, it creates a standard in the team that doesn't rely on the leader always holding accountability. Of course, the leader has a role, but high performing teams are comfortable holding one another accountable. And in our complex organizations and world, this is an important factor. All right, so, and then ultimately the top of the pyramid, the last piece of the model, just to give you the Coles Notes version, is really that teams that trust one another, they engage in conflict, commit to decisions, are comfortable holding one another accountable. they're also very likely to set aside their individual needs and agenda and focus exclusively on what is best for the team. So they're less likely to be tempted to place their department's priorities over others, their personal career aspirations, or their kind of, some of those ego drive elements that would detract from the inattention or the results that the organization wants to focus on. So all of these pieces, having trusting relationships with people, being able to engage in productive conflict and constructive conflict, being able to commit, even if we disagree, and be clear about what we're committing to, and then holding one another accountable for that, and putting aside some of our departmental or career aspirations or career drive that would maybe not be in the best interest of the team or the organization, really is going to help focus the team on their results. So that's a kind of a Coles Notes version of the 5 dysfunctions model. So what I'm gonna do is I will just talk a little bit about the link from the psychometrics and the team coaching. So obviously, from a psychometrics perspective, it's going to help you understand yourself better, right? And then also others, especially if it's used with a team in a team coaching engagement. If everybody did the Birkman or another psychometric, there's a neat ability to compare and contrast. Where could we experience conflict? Where could our communication styles not work as well? We could become more empathetic and adapt our approach based on others' preferences. We can enhance understanding of others, and that will obviously contribute to that foundation of trust. And as coaches, we work with clients to teach them team effectiveness principles and map their team Birkman results. We facilitate sessions to help them understand the collective strengths of the team, areas that they might need to be mindful of. If everybody falls into a certain area, maybe they're lacking some thinking or some diversity around different challenges or problems that they might need to solve as a team. So some sample areas that, typically would formulate a team coaching are, maybe it's a new team or it's a new leadership group. How are they going to establish the rules of engagement? Maybe the communication is not working as well. So we talk a little bit about the communication styles. Perhaps, they don't have a good ability to deal with conflict, or they're struggling with trust. Sometimes you see in mergers and acquisitions that the trust issue can be challenging. And sometimes it's interpersonal dynamics between a few people that need to be addressed. So I'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to hand this over to Jerome, and he's going to talk a little bit more specifically about the Birkman and go a little deeper on that front.
Thank you, Kristen. Okay, so just a quick comment, just for carry on from your last point is, it's great we can have this self-awareness so we can know ourselves well, but how do we fit into our team, right? How do we leverage our similarities to others on the team, and more importantly, I think our differences, right? And as human beings, that can be tough sometimes in a team, especially if there's pressure or there's it's something new, a new culture, merging of teams or what have you. So what I'd like to do is give you a brief introduction into the Birkman method, which is one of many assessments, as I'm sure you're familiar with, that are on the market. But the Birkman is one that I think really lends itself well to bringing not just reminders or awareness around what we see or we think we see in others or what we know we do well, but it really brings some great insight into our needs, sometimes our values, and what happens if if those needs and values aren't being met, right? Or we don't understand our differences around our needs, our preferences, our motives, our values. How do we react? How do we respond? And how does that derail a team? So again, there's many assessments out there. I know we're certified in a number of them: Hogan, MBTI, MRG's suite of tools, and others. But again, the Birkman, I think, lends itself well to what we've been talking about so far. And now from a team perspective, creating some team awareness and, most importantly, actions to have a new impact as a team. Okay. So the the Birkman has been around a very long time, 65 years, in fact, created by a Dr. Birkman, who just passed away a few years ago, at the ripe age of, I think, 92. He's been working on this a very long time, yet it's a very valid tool. It's very current, constantly being revised and updated, used certainly throughout the world by millions of people and organizations. Let's take a look at quickly what it measures. So on a little bit of the lighter side, it measures people's interests, right? So these are the things that we like, activities we prefer, and for teams, this can give just some general, insight into one another. It's also helpful. Birkman produces a number of different reports using this data, and interests they often tie to career preferences, so it can be used for career management, but also again to just understand each other's interests within a team. The other thing it measures, the upper left hand corner, are usual behaviors. So these are the things that we tend to know about ourselves, the things we've learned to do well over time. When we're at our best, they're the strengths that we're demonstrating. And these are a little easier to talk about in a team as well. We're pretty good at saying, as in a team session, about what we're good at and complimenting others on what they're good at. And that's important. We need to have that positive approach and leverage each other's strengths. But I think the real value from the Birkman in a team session comes from these other two pieces. So the needs. Needs are our intrinsic motivators, drivers. They're invisible to others. We don't always know others' needs. Right? We don't see them. They're not as apparent. But they're critical. They motivate us. They drive us. And when our needs are met, that's when we get to be at our best. That's when our strengths are really in play. Okay, so I'll show you in a few minutes through a high-level case study about how we use this information and what we did with a specific team. So if our needs aren't being met, we have stress behaviors. So the Birkman identifies that as well, as we see in the bottom left here, left-hand corner. So these are our reactions, right? And others get to see them. They're usually unproductive. They're usually contrary to our strengths, right? And often, again, we're triggered by a need or a value that's being stepped on or not met. And in any relationship, we know that is not uncommon, that people don't understand our needs, our expectations, and our values. So very briefly, that's what it's a great deal of information, but in brief, that's what the Birkman measures. Peter, if you could move ahead one slide, please.
There you go.
Also at a high level, thank you, are really, you'll see some similarities here too. I'm sure other assessments you've used, colors and some of the words will seem familiar, but at a high level, there are four boxes that individual would fit into. In the upper left-hand corner, we have people who are more the doers, right? They're hands-on, they like to see results, they tend to be action-oriented. We might see people in jobs and operations jobs, technical jobs, trades that would fall in here. And we can have organizations that are more red organizations too, right? So these categories, these quadrants really apply to individuals, but they can apply to sort of how we fit within an organization and such as well. But at a high level, we're talking about the individual, and we'll see in a moment when you look at someone's results, they tend to fit within, well, different aspects will fit within different quadrants. Sometimes people sit within one quadrant. They're really strong, strongly aligned to their interests and behaviors and such in one area. The analyzer in the bottom left is more of the one who follows the rules, right? Great at process, organized. We might think stereotypically or traditionally of an accountant or a researcher, someone of that nature. Okay? The upper right, the communicator. So the greens are more people-oriented. You might find individuals who who are in the helping professions or serving others, tend to be a little more outgoing, perhaps verbally, assertive, speak up, comfortable in groups. And in the bottom right, we have more of the thinkers, the strategic, a little more introspective, perhaps creative and innovative. Okay. So you'll see these colors and such, and the quadrants come into play here on the next slide. Oops, sorry, one more slide before that, but let's look at this one. That's okay, Peter. You can go to
that one.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes. So this is a sample of that same 4-box, the quadrants, and this is one individual's results, and you can see what it measures: the interests, the usual behaviors, the needs and stress behaviors, and where they sit. For this individual, they're very similar. They sit in the same quadrant. You may have someone with, where they're stretched out. Their interest may be up here on the top here, quite green, but their usual behaviors may be more red, and their needs might be more down at the bottom where they're quiet and they're a thinker. So this combination of these results for each individual will differ. And when we look at teams, we're going to see people in all different quadrants with all different aspects of interests and behaviors and needs. Okay. If you can back up one, Peter, to the 9, thank you, components. Just another sort of high-level look at some of the depth that Birkman goes in measuring behaviors. They have 9 components. You'll see which ones here relate to which of the quadrants. So you see the greens here, the people, the oriented, the blues, the reds, etc. And so it measures a great deal, right? From assertiveness, how we speak up, are we open, are we frank, or are we quieter? Our social energy, which is a little bit more of that introvert versus extrovert. What incents us, how we're driven. Is it about personal rewards, rewards for the group, and so on and so forth, from the energy to whether we kind of tend to be sensitive and internalize things or be able to more externalize things, whether we need to, our physical energy is high and we need to keep going or we need time to recharge, etc. So quite a lot of depth that the Birkman goes into. I'll stop there on this level of detail. If you could go ahead, the 2 slides then, Peter. Great. One other look at the depth at which some of the the report information we can pull from a Birkman goes into. So this takes one of the 9 components, social energy, which is about the sociability, sort of that introvert extrovert piece, and it shows you here some nice descriptors of what the usual behavior is. So this person, their usual behavior, their numerical result was 99, so they're quite high on this social energy scale. So they're very friendly, very outgoing. We might call them an extrovert. Okay, so it talks about their strengths. The usual behaviors are those strengths, right? At ease in groups, probably very good at public speaking, etc. So we can have a sense of, let's leverage those strengths in our team, right? Then it uncovers their needs. The needs in this case happen to be at the other end of the spectrum. And remember, the needs are what people don't necessarily know about us or see, right? So in this person's case, in order to be outgoing and sociable and friendly, they actually need plenty of time alone or in a small group to sort of recharge or have that one-on-one time with someone that can challenge them. They can have good discussions, and that recharges them and allows them to be friendly and outgoing. So a real contrast here, the usual behavior people see, the needs they don't see or necessarily know about us. So in a team setting, we're judging you on, you're the outgoing one. We're going to keep having you be in front of the group and be presenting, when that could be a little taxing for this particular individual. Okay, so it starts to give you a sense of what people see and what they may not know, and in a team setting, why it's really important to understand the needs of each other. Right? Because if we don't have our needs met, those people around us are going to see these stress behaviors. In this case, it's about someone withdrawing from the group. So that again shows you from each of the 9 components has that level of depth that it goes into. To make this a little more practical, I think, and to show you how we use this information to have an impact on a team, Peter, if you go to the next slide, going to show you a sample of an actual group of leaders. We've got 5 leaders, so there's actually a portion of the team here that I'm highlighting that we've worked with. And just to sort of set up this stage for this mini case study here, this was a new team led by a CEO, had just been in the role about a year. A couple of the other members were new to the organization, and there were some others who had a real long history, 20 plus years. So some knew each other, some didn't. Culture was changing, lots of change, lots of new expectations from the CEO. And so each individual went through that personal psychometric assessment, went through the Birkman, and we debriefed them and gave them insights for their personal growth and development. But then we brought it in here and said, let's come together and look at each other. Let's have some good conversation. Let's build trust, as Lencioni's model shows is so critically important to get up the stages to the results. And so first we started with looking at the interests, right? Because again, this is a little easier to look at. It's we're not likely going to jump into sort of judging each other when we learn about our interests about each other. So you can see here we have just labeled the CFO, finance leader was up here in the red box. So he likes taking action, right? More of the hands-on doing, seeing results, and we had them share. Get a little personal, be a little vulnerable, and to share some of their interests that fell within this area, within their own area. So this CFO just shared some information about how he has a cottage and he likes to, when he's there, he's hands-on again. He's working on things. He likes the outdoors. He likes that space, right? So we made some connection here. The compliance person, sort of no surprise, and sometimes our interests are very different from our job title, but this was kind of aligned. So she, in compliance, liked to, she too had a cottage, but liked to go away and read, right? Have that quiet time, have focus, okay? The HR person liked a lot of things, right? Sort of in the middle here. So the placement in the bottom left of the green quadrant really shows that there's some green, there's some reds, there's some yellows and blue interests, right? So varied interests. Might be a little bit different from what you'd expect maybe HR or the outgoing person to be. You might think there would be up here and higher end of the green quadrant, right? More outgoing type activities, but sort of a little of everything. So they shared, and it created some connection. Some people talked about their childhood and why they have some of these interests, why they would be here. The bottom right-hand corner, they talked about the blues. It's about being creative, but it's also, you might be musical. So these two individuals, the CEO and COO, talked about they both played musical instruments, and they didn't know that about each other. So it created some vulnerability, some opportunity to know each other at a different level and to start some, or enhance their personal connections. Okay. The next slide, please, Peter. Then we went into, again, another area that's a little lighter, a little easier for them to talk about with each other, which was the usual styles. So these are things that we do when we're at our best, our strengths. It's, again, we see these in each other, so again, a little easier for them to talk about. And we talked about how these help the team, right? So the COO, for example, happen to be friendly, energetic, great, also decisive. Well, you need that, right? But logical, sort of this balance, getting things done, keeping things moving, right? HR, there she is up in the top right-hand corner of the green. So yes, the strengths were to be very outgoing, enthusiastic, able to persuade, serving others, and so a lot of agreement to, yeah, great, we got to keep these strengths in play. We have to support each other here. And there was a great observation that they're different, right? And strengths align to what comes naturally as strengths for each of these leaders, and they could play off each other and remind each other, and go to each other if it wasn't their first strength. For example, compliance could go to HR to get some help and guidance on people leadership, right, and being a little more assertive there and managing performance and such. So it allowed some great conversation, productive, practical conversation to reinforce their strengths and how they work together. The next slide, please. This was the tougher conversation, the harder conversation, right? This is where we as facilitators and coaches take more of a team coaching approach, because we're now talking about needs, values, things that happen to us when we're under pressure and stress, right? And this team was actually, again, sort of this newer team. We're going into an important time. They were going into a strategy planning season, and they were going to have to be negotiating and trusting each other, and having that conflict that we see at the second stage in Lencioni's model. And so with this, we took a deep dive into needs and stress behaviors and asked the group to be open, right, and to be vulnerable, because we really here are talking about that trust piece, and there was a need for them to really be vulnerable, right? So we talked about the CEO and COO, actually had them talk about and articulate, when they're under stress, what happens in this red zone. The CEO in particular, likes to see results. So his strength of being results oriented became an overstrength, right? So he would get very demanding, driving for results all the time, which some perceived him as aggressive as opposed to assertive and just driving results. So we talked about those perceptions, right, very openly, and it's hard, and that's where the coaching comes into play. You draw that out of others, right? You help them to take little steps to share. You see the different players here in the different quadrants. So the needs were quite different. We actually went through an exercise and asked them to share some of their, a personal story about something that connected them to how they tend to be when under stress. And some interesting stories came out. They started to open up and share about, gosh, I can't remember specific examples for you, but just sharing some personal insights that require them to be extremely vulnerable and to share a deeper part of themselves that no one knew, that helped to explain, this is why, compliance, for example, why you tend to be so strict about the rules, right? So when I want to be creative and flexible, and you're saying no, follow the rules, we have to do it this way. Now I understand there's a personal connection. When you were young, you used to do this. You come by this naturally. So these insights into the needs and what has been happening in their interactions in the workplace just became very, very, very valuable, and they really connected to one another. Again, it's a tough process, so it does require some careful facilitation and careful team coaching, right? And preparing. Again, we prepared the group to be ready to talk about some of these things to make those connections. So through the team session, we continue to evolve, and the important part here was to not just give them this insight, but then to make sure that they were leaving with some actions, right? Some real changes. So they left with personal commitments to themselves, some commitments to each other as a team, and then we continue to work with them and coach them. And one standout for me, from my perspective, I was working with the compliance leader from a coaching perspective, one-on-one. In the session, the CEO and the compliance officer, they acknowledged that they had some challenges with each other and had different mindsets. CEO, again, was new. Compliance officer had been with the organization over 20 years. And so we continued the conversations, and I coached in a three-way discussion. And we went deeper into some of what their insights were of each other, and they made some commitments, and we talked about, okay, who's accountable? What rules do we each need? How are we going to work together? How do we meet each other's needs? And it was incredibly impactful to see them take that over and continue the conversation and make changes with one another to be able to move forward. So really, really very quick sort of case study. I'm conscious of our time here, but that is an example of how you can take these insights and really make them meaningful and drive to action. That's changing this organization. They are a much tighter team, working far better together. Sure, they slip. Sure, they still have reactions. There's still pressure, but they know what to come back to, and they know how to continue to move forward. And that's their competitive advantage, and others see it too in the team, right, below them. Okay. So for sake of time, I'll stop there.
We'll move on to the next one.
Please. So we have some resources and takeaways for you. So Peter, will be people on the call, will they be able to take away a copy of this, or?
Yeah, this will be posted on our website right after the session, so they'll be able to access it and have all this information right at their fingertips.
Great. So there's a short video of Birkman. Birkman provides many reports. You can get a sense of what some of those are by looking at that site. Some of the references Kristen made. So Richard Boyatzis is Changing Behaviors, the 5 intentional change theory strategies. There's a link to that, so some good reading material there. There's some great information that often used. We want to get to action, we want to get to behavioral change, and to do that we need to have some reminders of what to do, what are the remedies. And so this last reference to For Your Improvement, Guide for Development and Coaching, is the Lombardo Eichinger book, and it gives you a great link. It's a pricey book, but you can buy it perhaps online, Amazon used. And what it does is it describes these competencies, different behaviors, and it gives remedies and nice practical suggestions for development, whether it be for an individual or you use in the teams. And then the last takeaway is connection YouTube videos of Lencioni's model and the different stages in that. And I think that is also extremely helpful. They're just about 2 minutes long and nice and simple to watch.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Thanks, Jerome, for your insights and information. I've been monitoring the Q&A section and the chat section. We don't have any questions or chat questions at the moment. And I am aware of our time, and I think we've reached almost our 1 hour limit. So at this point, I think we'll wrap up the session, and hope those online have enjoyed the session and learned some stuff. And I'd like to thank Kristen and Jerome for their insights and their information. And until our next webcast, thank you and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.